Welcome to the latest from the Sidelines with Jon Akin. I'm Jason Longshore. It was the first weekend of the season for the Oglethorpe Stormy Petrels. Results weren't where you guys would want, John, but I'm sure that the quality of play against two really good opponents does give you some good feelings going into your first road trip of the season.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, being 0-2 is never the way you want to start out, but what we did in those games at times was really, convincing. I think in the Washington Lee game, losing 1-0, but really kind of not finishing well, but outplaying for large portions of the game, number 11 team in the country, and then the dominating performance against Emory was exciting to see. But again, like you said, the results are frustrating, but I think if we build on those things, the results will come in time.
It's something we talk about a lot with a number of games on our show and just in conversation. And I think sometimes it's maybe a little difficult to grasp for fans. And I'm curious how your young players grasp it, because both games I thought Oglethorpe was the better team. I thought there were things that prevented the wins from happening, and whether it's mistake, whether it's lack of finishing, whatever. But how do you kind of express that to your players that, hey, we didn't get wins here, but we're on the right track, and they were good performances even without the result?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of law of averages. We do have to learn how to win, but I think, how I try to convey that is, we had a preseason game and we were extremely poor against Piedmont, but we won 6-0, and I let the team have it. And, I try to say, we play to a certain standard, and even if we come out on the wrong side of it, I'll live with that, because I know that over time the results will take care of themselves if you're doing the right things. Early in the season, against quality opponents, putting up, good fights. We did a lot of things really well, which is hard to do with a lot of new faces, a very short preseason. Putting those performances together are the most difficult things. Now we have to add the ingredients of, the quality to finish those games off and be ruthless and things like that. I think we played to a good standard, and I think we're capable of even a little bit more, which is, if you're playing top 20 teams and you're outperforming them, you should have a good year.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you should. I want to dig into a little bit more of what we were talking about last week with the, balancing technical and tactical training and kind of where things stand now that you've got a couple games under your belt. And I think, I was watching some of the subs and some of the changes and different players that maybe I was getting to know and seeing what their characteristics would open up for the team tactically. And what I noticed, and this is something that we've had a big conversation about players in their position. And I think in the old school way of thinking, if you're a right back, you're a right back. That's what you play. You don't play anywhere else. You're not a winger, you're a right back. But what I'm seeing more and more of managers who kind of subscribe to the same theories that you have is players' technical skills will allow them to play in different positions, even if they haven't experienced it as much. And that opens up tactical opportunities for you. Am I on the right path with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's always, there's a general framework, if you will, as we thought about systems of, 4-4-2, 3-5-2, and you have to understand the characteristics of those players within those systems. That being said, if a player is, a little more attack-minded, maybe you set him up as a right back, but, you have him, maybe play more as a right winger. Mm-hmm. And so, these systems are fluid, and what you have to do is, you have to, first of all, share the player with the players, the movements that you're looking for in that tactical setup. And then there's nuances and movements that work accordingly. And that works within your own system, without opposition. And then obviously you add a layer of, with the opposition, how are those matchups? And I'll give you an example. In our game going from Washington Lee versus Emory, we moved some players around. We moved James around from the 9 to, the 7, and moved from a center forward to the right winger. And in the game, and then we kind of switched back based on kind of how the game was going. Well, we saw some weaknesses on the Emory side of things, and we had the same group of players on the field, but we moved them into different roles. Not asking them to play really differently, just a couple specific things. So it was the same system with a different group of players based on the characteristics those players had against the matchup we were facing on the day.
That's such a change over time, it feels like, where, I hate to be the old guys here and be like, back in our day, but when we were playing and a coach would move us into a different position, we would be told to play differently than we play. But now you're able to see, and I think James is a really interesting player to talk about because he has a very unique skill set, and you're able to kind of deploy him in different parts of the field that can open up things tactically for the team as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes for every single player. And I think that, you can, exploit different things. A real easy one for, the listeners to kind of understand is traditionally, you want your left-footed players on the left side because they can open up things technically. Their body naturally opens up to their strong foot, which gives them basically 180 degrees to pass a ball, if you will. And I think you might put that left-sided player on the right side because now they're opening up to shoot instead of opening up to cross the ball.
Right.
They're cutting into their strong foot, which gives you some options. And then, not to nerd out too much, but, as that player cuts in, they're obviously creating a channel for maybe a late runner, which can unbalance some teams, in 2v1 situations, which are always trying to create overloads. So there's a technical ability of a certain player that you can kind of invert as the first option that gives some different looks and kind of keeps people on their toes and keeps them honest, which, unveils another layer of options for your team to attack.
It's funny, another kind of subcurrent that we have on soccer down here is where we will mention things related to pro wrestling because we're all pro wrestling geeks. It makes me think of a comment from Paul Heyman, who ran ECW for a number of years, and they were the underdog small company. And he talked about how they would accentuate their positives and hide the weaknesses. And I feel like when you create that tactical plan and you're thinking about the technical abilities, that's really what goes into it, is you want to create those positives and those advantages, but then hide, if a player isn't as strong at a certain area and you need to protect them a little bit more, you find ways to hide that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, you've got to, that's coaching, right? Essentially coaching is about limiting mistakes with the players that you have to work with. And then obviously, accentuating the positives and the strengths that you have to, appear stronger and maybe be stronger and develop those qualities over time. So, that happens in a micro cycle of a week. You try to do certain things based on an opponent, and then obviously you're trying to do that in a macro cycle of a whole season. And then you could even go bigger of a player's certain career, both in technical abilities, understanding of the game. And, and then, I'll put in this caveat that you can go down these rabbit holes of things you can try, and experiment with, but you also have to recognize what level you're working with.
Right.
And not get too carried away, because then you're kind of getting away from the basic fundamentals of the game. And, regardless of position, the games become, quite free flowing, and not as rigid as it used to be. So I think that gives you the more flexibility about, people have to attack, people have to defend, strikers, even Messi is pressing the ball. They're not resting until they get it. So, all players have to have, good understandings of, attack and defense and 1v1 defending and, 1v1 attacking for the most part, but they've all got limitations, and then you deploy them to, what works best for, what you're trying to accomplish.
And it's that balance that I'm sure, you kind of go through at the start of every season when you start going through your roster and the, capabilities of your different players and what they can do, and then how that colors what tactical options you have to start the year, what you think you can develop over a little bit of time. And it kind of creates your game model for the year that's still within your philosophy, but has to match the players you actually have and their technical ability.
Yeah, and I'll give you a great example. So we have some really talented center midfielders, and some are, they're all good on the ball, but some are bigger and stronger in the air. And depending on how the game match up, it's like, do you put the better soccer players in there? And they're all good soccer players, but do you put the real guys that are just thinkers and, not going to give the ball away ever? You put those guys in there to keep the ball, right, longer periods, which means you're not defending, or do you recognize that the opponents you're playing against, Washington, Lee, and Emory are two classic examples where they're very direct. I mean, every time Washington and Lee got the ball, they just played a long diagonal, they're playing for second balls. So if you put in a very technical center mid who's on the smaller side, maybe not aerial battles or second balls or kind of that, that second ball mentality isn't in their DNA at all, are they going to be kind of left out in a matchup like that? Or do you say, hey, we know they're not going to win all those, but they're going to help us retain the ball, 20% more, which is going to, lessen those opportunities. So, that's the balance that you have to look at with the player personnel and the individual characteristics they have, and then obviously the opponent you're playing against.
Now, when you get to that point, you're thinking about your season and your plan, and even game to game, probably to a lesser extent here. I'm thinking more bigger picture, and you look at a player that can help you in certain parts of the field, can really be a big asset to you, but there's something in their technical ability that you can work on. And I think we have this kind of old school mentality of, like, especially by the time they get to you at 18 to 22, like, players are who they are, but you can work on lots of different things like body shape and elements of very specific technical skills that can help open up more tactical possibilities for the whole group.
Yeah, and I'd say that every single player, they are where they are when they arrive, right? And some of them have better youth coaches than others that ingrain these very important qualities that serve them well as a player. However, if you are going to an environment where it's faster and the athletes are stronger and you have to do things earlier, and automatically, depending on how far they're ingrained, they're going to be successful in doing that. And I would argue that almost every player that we get still, could do those things better, faster, and make it more natural or automatic for them. So that's what we spend time on. We've got some guys that, hey, if there's not they're not tired or there's not pressure, they're always going to do it. But what happens when you're matched up against a, better quality side, or somebody at least is equal? Is it going to be automatic in those situations? And that's when we drill down. There's two specific examples. I won't talk about individual players right now unless you really force my hand.
No.
There's two players exactly where that might be all they do for half of every single training session for the rest of the year, because if they get those two things right, I mean, they really might be unstoppable. I mean, at our level, of course. So.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting balance that is, maybe it's new to me, in that when you're creating those training session plans, and it's day to day, and of course it will evolve based on what you're seeing, but you have a kind of overarching plan for the year. Balancing those sorts of things, balancing how you want the whole team to play, but also each individual and what you can do in training sessions to improve a group of players in a certain thing, or one player in a certain thing, technically, that can make them better and in turn make the whole team better.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. That's the soccer stuff. It's all relative and it's all connected. Youth stuff is very similar to the youngest ages is more technical and more love and fun and enjoyment, and then you kind of gravitate towards getting results and what are the really fine-tuned pieces that you have to do. But then you dive back into a team dynamic, and I'll give you an example. We have several good players that didn't even get time in that game based on how the game was going and whatever else, even in a back-to-back situation. And now I have to kind of go back to the drawing board in a very short week and say, man, did my substitution pattern work? There are a couple guys that I was kind of on the fence about using, but didn't, for various reasons. But how can I factor that into a training session to give them the opportunity to maybe prove me wrong or change the depth chart with that? So it's a tricky business of getting it right, both in developing the individual players that if they improve that, they're going to do that. And like you mentioned, the thing about checking your shoulder, receiving the ball side on, and giving yourself those, I always call this kind of my term of being the 180-degree player. So you're not limited in the attacking when you're facing the attacking direction. And then, maybe receiving the ball on the front foot or trying to time your run right, for the other player that you could probably wonder who that is. And, but then also, in the 6-13 through 22 depth chart, guys that towards the end that were close that I could have easily gone a different direction and thrown them in, how am I going to give them the opportunity, to be fair to the process and maybe kind of turn my head and see if they, if I was really wrong in those early assessments, because we've been working together, our sample size to review is so short that, you have to be open to the possibility that maybe you got that depth chart wrong. So.
Yeah, I think that's what the best managers do, is they're always kind of evaluating themselves in these situations, because it does come down to small margins. Whether we're talking about Oglethorpe and Emory on Sunday, or we're talking, USA and Canada Sunday night in Nashville, like there's small margins in these games, and it can be a sub, it can be not even a sub, but a tactical switch, moving your right winger to the left side. I mean, we see that happen a lot. It's stuff like that can be the difference between winning and losing the higher the level you go.
Yeah, and then I'll even throw that layer in. Sometimes it's completely without the manager or the coach being involved. What if it's you really want to hyper highlight the level of details? What about the surface? It might be out of the player's control and the manager's control on the ball bounced up before he hit the ball in a one-on-one and it goes over the net when, maybe he couldn't see that little divot, or you selected a player to do something that, 100 times in a row he gets right and he's confident in, but he loses concentration and it's not executed right. So does that make that substitution decision wrong? I don't think so, but you have to understand, the context of, it was the right move. It wasn't executed properly. We're going to stick with that, as opposed to, oh, they got the tactics all wrong. They inverted the wingers and they shouldn't have done that. And that's where all of us, pundits can have some fun with it, because you never really know unless you're really in the team, and you're really making those decisions and those players intimately.
Yeah, that's always the hardest thing, is looking at it from the outside. And, I think I get accused sometimes of giving coaches too much leeway in these kinds of things, but you're dead on. And, when you go into the detail, especially as you've mentioned, so many things from a technical perspective that are far more detailed than I think we used to talk about with it. It used to be can they play with both feet? Are they good in the air? Very basic technical skills. Now, getting to those points of, how do they turn? Do they time their runs correctly? All those kinds of things. We don't see that from the outside. You do with your team. So you're making decisions with more information than anybody else could possibly have. And it's one of the hardest things when you're watching a game and evaluating like a team's performance, not seeing every training session and knowing those players as well as the coaching staff does.
Yeah, it's the coolest thing ever because, you're always guessing, and it's what was it this, was it that? And I think that's what kind of brings everybody in because they see what they see. Mm-hmm. And that's the fun part, right? It's everybody's game. They get to enjoy it from their vantage point. But when you fundamentally are putting people out there, it's really the people closest to it. They kind of get the context of what it is. And that's actually probably the best part of it is because we are a part of the process, and you get to see some really high level teams at a close level, intimately, and you get to know some things that kind of, maybe paint the way you describe things. And, we're just lucky to be so close to the game of soccer and work with young players and college players. And, that's the fun part. It is very complex when you drill down like that, but at the same time, it's what a cool thing we get to do.
Okay, I want to throw a few more at you before we go, kind of based off where we've been in this conversation. Are you finding more players today when they get to you at the college level have a greater tactical awareness than they used to?
That's a really good question. Oof, you stumped me there because I'm going through 20 years of memories here in less than a minute and trying to see what sticks out to me. I will say this. I would say they have a general better understanding than they did.
Makes sense.
I'm not. Let me give you an example. They're all playing FIFA. Yeah. Right? They can set up their tactical managers, and they get the generic, hey, we're doing a 3-5-2 or a 4-3-3, and I think they can talk about it, and I think that they can see world-class players more often than they've ever been able to see it. Mm-hmm. Now they're watching on their phones, they're watching on their bus, they're now ESPN's picking up La Liga, and I think they're seeing it more. However, I don't know if we are. I don't know if we are seeing more of them understand, the nuances of all of those things. I think generically, all of them understand it more because it's around more.
Right.
I don't know if coaches are doing a good enough job, candidly, at the youth level to bring them into the fold. Like let me try to describe it like this. Yeah. I don't know if we are growing our players, to be great coaches, because obviously how many guys are going to move on to the professional ranks? Very, very few.
Right.
How can we grow the next generation of players to teach the next generation where they're going to enjoy the game and want to give back and be involved in the youth sport and be high school coaches and club coaches. I don't know if this recent generation of coaches, and I'd say in the last 10 years, is serving this population of players as well as maybe some have in the past. And I'll give examples of, Tom Fitzgerald from Florida was one of the greatest, wrote some coaching manuals, I had the pleasure to work with, Jay Miller, involved in the U.S. Coaching Federation. And this is we could dive into 4 more topics about, how the business of soccer isn't necessarily serving the long-term purpose of growing the game and, helping us to develop a culture of soccer. I think we're a little bit off the rails right now.
It's great
on the youth side of things. Yeah,
it's funny because I love that the question I was thinking about was like specifically about one group of players, and now we've got another topic for a future show. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's but it's again in the same way that we started this conversation. The technical and tactical are intertwined. Mm-hmm. They're so connected, based on what's happening and what you're trying to accomplish and what they're capable of. And the same thing, do our players now understand the game more than they did? And I would say generically yes, but intimately no.
Makes sense.
And then I connect that back to where they came from. What are our youth coaches? Are they sitting them down? Are they, and listen, there's some unbelievable youth coaches out there, but I'm making a general statement about, our players that I've worked with at Oglethorpe that have come from every club in the state of Georgia and, all over the Southeast and some around the country. And I would say that, a few of the people have, felt like, hey, I'm going to be involved and move on. But I would say it was at the same rate as it was, before, and, kind of give back and that understanding of how the game connects all of us. So, I'm looking forward to extending our our conversation about, how it's all connected.
Okay, I'm gonna keep the other question in my back pocket then, because I wanna continue to follow up on this. And you guys out there listening, as you have questions about anything on the coaching front and you want to throw those into this conversation that is ongoing, please send us a message. Let us know what you want to ask, whether it's technical, whether it's tactical, whether it's just, philosophical about coaching, whether it's about youth, college, high school, whatever. Throw that into the mix. Send us a message. We will work those in. I will end with this then. Like, I guess what I'm seeing is, and you mentioned the accessibility, and that's a huge factor of it. I feel like in the past, maybe every team you would see at a certain age group would play a 4-4-2, and then everything became 4-3-3 because of the Dutch. And now at least we're talking about 3-4-3s and 3-5-2s and 3-4-2-1s, and when we start trying to break down into a formation set of numbers, what Atlanta United's doing sometimes, I mean, it's like a 3-3-3-1, whatever you want to get into, I can come up with a numbering system for it. But what does that actually tell you?
Right.
What's interesting to me about this is one of the long-term, I think, complaints about American soccer and what would take us to the next level was that they're not good enough technically. They're not good enough skill-wise. I feel like that's been wrong for a long time. I think it's the tactical side, because it feels like other young players, similar ages, are further along with that understanding, not just of the base level like you mentioned, but what a right winger does in a 4-3-3 if they are inverted. They just have more of that tactical education at a young age that makes them more well-rounded players. Am I wrong in that from what you're seeing?
No. We've had some unbelievable technical players over the years. I think it's a combination of a few different things. I think one is maybe, I would say generically, kids are playing more soccer on their own, free play, if you will, around the world, right? It's not as organized. So I think that inherently can develop a technical ability that is not forced, if you will. To a degree, generically around that. The other thing that you have to understand that most clubs around the world are professional clubs to some degree, right? And I think those coaches take their jobs a lot more seriously than some of our, again, I'm generically speaking here. And I think it's their job, if they're working 4 days a week instead of 2 days a week, they're going to get more information. There may be more, tactical understanding. Those coaches may have gone, I'm almost positive, quite a few of those coaches are required to have a much higher understanding of actually teaching the game. And in turn, that trickles down to their understanding overall. And then, the third pillar, if you will, third leg to stand on in this argument would be culture, right? Mm-hmm. We have so many options for our kids that it's not just about all of the pieces of the soccer puzzle, right? There's other options for them. So I think they're a little more distracted as a culture, and whether it's distracted by different sports, whether it's distracted with, the affluence in the U.S., they're not as committed to the entire understanding. So I think you've got to factor that in with that. So that the tactical understanding, I would agree with you. But I think it comes back to those other pieces of the puzzle, cultural, maybe higher levels of coaches and their education, and in turn passing that knowledge along to the younger players. I think those pieces can't be neglected when you're candidly looking at that statement.
Well, I'm sure in a few more episodes we'll have it all figured out. The whole game, we'll be able to explain it in 5 minutes. It'll all be good. Everybody will be on the same page.
Easy. It's no problem at all. We can knock that out anytime.
So you guys are heading out west with Oglethorpe, first road trip of the season, and it's a long one. 2 games out in California this weekend.
Yeah, we're excited. It was a trip that we had planned last year. Obviously, got pushed off to the pandemic. We're going out to play 2 great schools, Claremont Mudscripts and University of Redlands. So we're flying Atlanta to LA. There's a extreme heat advisory, so that's going to be interesting. We're playing 2 games at 7 p.m. So we'll see how that goes. But the guys are excited. We're excited to do the trip. It is a long one. Be going Thursday to Monday. But we get to see a different side of the country, play 2 great teams. Continue to test ourselves. Mudscripts, I think, is 14th in the country right now. So in Redlands, those 2 teams are always in their conference finals. So we'll continue to test our mettle against 2 great teams, and hopefully we can not only outplay 2 great teams again, but get the results that we're looking for, because we need to learn how to win too as a team this year.
It'll be a perfect opportunity after the Atlanta-Orlando game on Friday night. Get home, 10 o'clock Eastern Time kickoff. Go to gopetrels.com for the video link. The Redlands game will be on Sunday at, looks like, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. That link is not up yet, but hopefully there will be some video out of Redlands. And then back home on the 17th and the 18th for back-to-back games against Lynchburg and against Calvin. Jon, thanks for the time. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, look, thanks so much for having me. And hopefully we'll report back, or you'll be able to see us get some good results while we're out west.
Good luck out west, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Jason.